Hello and welcome to the Fairbanks Year-Round Podcast. Welcome back, I should say. I am your host, Blake Schreckheis, an agent with the Summit Realty Group. And I almost said Summit Realty Group Podcast. That was the old one. I will have we'll get into Steven Hoke, who he told me his title, I forgot, Director of the Air Quality? No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Fairbanks North Star Borough Air Quality Manager.
That's better. Thanks, man.
Thanks for the promotion, though. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are shortly going to get into basically all things air quality. This is going to be a good primer for people who are coming to the area and don't know about Fairbanks air quality issues that we're having and what we're doing to improve that, and people who live here who may have some misconceptions as well. But before all that, I always like to ask all my guests, what brought you to Fairbanks?
I was born and raised here.
Oh, okay. Do you ever get away?
Oh, I've left many a times.
Okay.
Many times. There's no place like Fairbanks.
Yeah, keeps drawing you back.
Something does.
Something does for sure.
Ain't the weather.
Yeah, we've talked about that a lot. There's something that always comes up is the people that live here and hate it and the people that live here and love it. And there's always the two kind of people, and the fact that Fairbanks seems to have, I don't know about Fairbanks in particular, Alaska has this draw when you go away. Seems to just, maybe it's just home for a lot of people. So, alrighty. So let's start with the air quality in general and maybe some causes. We don't have to get super scientific, but my understanding is we have bad air quality here much of the year. Maybe you want to rephrase that. What causes that?
So during the winter, we get these inversions where the hot air and cold air layer, and it traps all the emissions from cars, trucks, anything below that layer, and pushes it down to where we get this spike in PM 2.5 on those days.
What's PM? Say it again.
PM 2.5.
PM 2.5.
So that's particulate matter less than 2.5 micrograms in size.
Okay. And if it's greater than that, is it not like a breathing concern, or like what?
Then you get into PM10, which is the same thing, just less than 10 instead of less than 2.5. And it's also a breathing concern. But the PM 2.5 can actually enter the lungs, into the bloodstream, has been linked to heart disease, lung issues.
And so are these? This is just a personal query of mine, I guess. These small particulates, they're not. I mean, they can be like, I think people imagine like Agent Orange or like some horrible chemical coming into your system. They can be something that's caustic in that way, but are they just being so small of particulates that matters? Like even like, you know what I'm saying? Like, is the material that you're breathing in matter so much as the size that's able to kind of work yourself into its system?
Right. So there's different types of PM 2.5, if you will. You have the stuff that PM 2.5 that's generated from organic carbon, for instance, and that's our biggest concern here in the interior because of wood smoke.
Right.
And so that's kind of link us to our next part of the conversation.
Absolutely.
But it's the quantity and size. So I mean, like when you're out walking around, you're probably breathing in PM 2.5, but at what quantity are you breathing that in? And, what kind of penetration do you get?
Absolutely. So are we generally seeing this when you talked about the inversion, which the way I always think of it, and you can correct me if this is a bad analogy, is being in the river valley, we're kind of in a bowl, and when this inversion happens, we get a Ziploc or a Tupperware lid put on top of our air that kind of just closes everything in there. So everything we're doing, burning fuel, burning wood, driving your car, is all just kind of adding to that concentration.
Exactly.
Okay, great. So in the winter, it's not always, is the inversion always tied to how cold it is, or is there other?
It's meteorology. It has to do with temperature, weather patterns, pressures, stuff above my pay grade.
Yeah, I gotcha.
But the meteorologists can usually predict them. The state meteorologist is the one who calls the current state curtailments, and they're pretty good at predicting them, but even they miss them sometimes just because weather changes, patterns change, pressures switch.
Absolutely. Yeah. So this is happening generally in the winter. Inversion's not happening in the summer. All right. Okay. Yeah. That's what I figured. And then in the summer, it seems like more of the concern would be wildfires, which is kind of out of our controls. I don't know if you.
Right. And so when you start talking about wildfires in the PM 2.5 or the non-attainment area, EPA, you start talking about all that. What you need to kind of focus on there is the state applies for exemptions for those days. And the reason we are where we are when it comes to wood stoves and all this stuff we're going to get into a little further is because of the area that has been designated as a non-attainment area has not met the federal standard or has exceeded the federal standard for PM 2.5. And that federal standard is made by health gurus down in DC who's decided that this is the level at which it becomes unhealthy, and that's for the entire nation. And everybody has to meet this in order to meet or comply with the Clean Air Act.
Yeah. So I think there's a little frustration there, at least from people I've spoken with a lot about this.
I would say there's a lot of frustration there.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't. This is not like a gotcha interview or anything like that. But I do, as much as you can speak to it, I guess there's a general feeling that, hey, that guideline shouldn't apply to everything. Like, it seems like a very general guideline. And again, we have like just nature that is causing a high influence of this PM 2.5 that you're talking about. So I guess that's the frustration, but I don't know, maybe the counter argument is that, well, we should still take care of it even still. Yeah. But
I mean, there's a good point in there, but what you need to come down to is these general guidelines or these health concerns are for humans.
Right.
You know, they come up with these based on human health statistics and just how, you know, everything else goes there. And we're human and we are also part of the nation. So we should probably comply with that rule. As far as, you know, yes, nature does have wildfires. And how would you presume we take care of that and limit the amount of that? Wildfires are a natural cycle of the world. I mean, they happen everywhere. You know, we can clean up and try to prevent them as much as possible. But once they start happening, it takes a lot of time, manpower, and money to put them out. Right. Especially when you're talking of thousands, tens of thousands of acres in Alaska. I mean, it's
and they're generally not putting them out. They're just curtailing, you know, maybe the direction of them.
Right. Yeah. The difference is that we can control what we put into our bowl during the winter.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you know, controlling that wildfire, I think, is kind of a pipe dream. I mean, like, I've had a lot of people bring it up to me over the years. You know, I've been doing this for 10 plus years, and so somebody always brings it up. You know, why don't you do something about those wildfires? Okay, I'll get right on that. I never know.
We're a lot more aggressive. I don't want to say in Alaska specifically, but in the country, you can see where controlling the wildfires was maybe, or putting them out or whatever it is, was much more the idea, where we kind of found that would make for worse wildfires down the way, you know? Right. So there is very much, and I know we're kind of off subject here, but there is kind of this balance of like, hey, you know, there is some control we want. We don't want a wildfire to tear through Fairbanks and burn everybody's home down. That would be, you know, but it may be worth a lot of these woods, you know, getting burnt because that's the natural process and things come back in a specific manner. So back to things we can control. So the non-attainment zone, why don't you explain what that means?
So in 2009, 2010, the EPA designated the Fairbanks non-attainment zone. They started off by saying they wanted the whole borough to be in non-attainment, which meant all these state regulations, everything would have been for the entire borough. The state and the borough ended up negotiating that down to the size of the, you know, the weird shape that we have now, you know, going from up past Fox, out to Esther, and then down towards the flood projects there in North Pole. And so they had negotiated down to that size. It was roughly based off the, it used to be FMATS, Fairbanks Metropolitan Area Transportation System map. So it's where a lot of federal highway dollars get spent. It's actually within that area. Okay. And that's kind of where they base that map off, just despite some misconceptions.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I assumed it was like they were looking for the things that were below the inversion or the average, you know, because the inversion can change. So it's not related to the...
No. You'll notice that a huge swath of the non-attainment area is actually up in the hills.
True.
Yeah.
True. Okay.
So, I mean, it's... Yeah.
Where do you guys have like a map of that, I guess, on the borough site?
Yeah, so the borough has a map of it. The state has a really good one if you, just Google ADEC real estate. And then there's this little thing that says where, and you click it, and it brings up this interactive map. You type in your address, and it'll... If you're in the yellow, you're in the non-attainment area. You're outside the yellow, you're not in it. So
everything we're talking about as far as, I guess we can call it like regulations or things that are doing to improve the air quality, this is all pertaining to the non-attainment area.
That is correct.
Correct. Okay, cool. So what are our big drivers for the PM 2.5? I know we talked about wood burning.
I mean, so really wood burning. I mean, it's 60 to 80%, depending on which area you're in.
Right.
Everything else is spread out between, diesel burning. So either heating systems, They just proved through some SO2 studies with UAF and the Alpaca Group that the power plants were not significant contributors, which was good news. Means less regulations on the power plant, which means hopefully no costly energy hikes. Well, any more than we've already seen. So, I mean, really, the main focus of the state and what the borough helps out with the change-out program is wood stoves.
Gotcha.
The side note to that is, as I said, the SO2 generated from home heating through fuel oil.
Right. So yeah, that's interesting because that's a big pushback I always hear is like, hey, this is not going to add up. We had Bryce Ward on, and this got brought up, I don't know, it's been over a year ago. And my question then, and I'll ask it again, and you'll probably have a similar answer, was, let's say everybody with a wood stove burnt the driest wood you can get, even kiln dried or whatever, and did it properly and had a stove that meets regulation. It still sounds like to me still puts out more PM 2.5 than, let's say, like a diesel home heat, like by a good margin. In general, I'd say yes. I mean, you can get a good amount of particulate and SO2 out of a dirty oil appliance. Right. It's not going to compare to your wood stove. And then I would ask, what regulations? Are we talking EPA's regulations or the state's? Part of the issue we have, so I used to work with the state of Alaska in reviewing stove certification test reports, responding to complaints. And I can tell you that the EPA's certification test methods are or have been previously in the previous years subpar. And they did not do their due diligence when reviewing those test reports and ensuring that those devices emitted what people claimed they were emitting. Right. So they were doing very kind of like the VDub big thing that happened. I don't know. I guess that's been 15 years ago. It's been a while ago. So what it sounds like to me was if you put the right kind of wood stacked in a very specific, like they give it very, very specific inputs to get an emission rating on the outside. And I'm sure there's more detail to that. But then when you look at like, hey, how is wood actually being burnt in people's houses? These ratings for these stoves went to the pooper.
Yeah, 10 to 20 times higher than the certification value, which makes a big deal when you're in nonattainment and trying to calculate how long it'll take you to get into compliance when you're subtracting emissions based on a bogus number when they're really emitting 20 times more.
Right. And you're like, hey, why aren't these numbers going down? We're getting more of these stoves put in. So the list of what is permissible, I guess, when you put a new stove into a house is getting smaller and smaller. And am I right in saying that even like Blaze King's kind of the big name around here? And it sounds like that is pretty much going. I don't know if all their models are or what's
So the state of Alaska maintains that list. In my previous job, that was part of what I did. I can tell you that there may be blaze clean stoves, and there may be a lot of clean stoves that we just. When I say we, I mean the state of Alaska, not me, the borough. That they just haven't been able to be identified because of deficiencies within that testing process. So how can you trust a test when you've proven that the results are bogus? So I mean, I imagine there'll be opportunities for any of these stove manufacturers to communicate and work with the state of Alaska to get back on that list to kind of increase the number of stoves, because I think they're down to 13 now, and it's going to get smaller here soon if it hasn't already. I might have missed that date, but
it's tough, and it's things like this. So I am I like burning wood, and again, I'm not trying to be like argumentative or anything, but just giving this side of the story is where like I bought a house, I put a wood stove in last year, and it sounds like that wood stove will now no longer be like meet standards, which is kind of a huge bummer. Go ahead.
So let me clarify. So that stove, you installed it last year. It now doesn't meet standards, but it's grandfathered in. You're not going to have to remove that as long as it, the current state regs state that as long as it's below 2.0 grams per hour, which if you installed it last year, it should be. Yeah. And then it's less than 20 years old. You're good.
Yeah.
You're good for the next.
I'm with you on that for sure. But just even in the air quality conversation, let's say there was no one regulating me. It's like, well, now it's kind of a bummer because it's like, I do like to burn wood. I obviously the big argument I think in general is personal freedom. But I also do realize that when I burn wood, my wood smoke does not stay on my property. And that's kind of the big issue, obviously. If you were just smoking yourself out, do whatever you want. But the thing is when you're burning wood, it's very obviously affecting the, area around you. However far that goes, I don't know. But when you have a bunch of people burning, of course. So I think a lot of that frustration is coming from all these changing things. It really feels like, again, someone who burns wood, who talks to a lot of people who burn wood, what it feels like is, hey, the borough doesn't want us burning wood anymore. And they're slowly they just want us to get rid of everything. There'll be a point where they're going to say, hey, wood stoves aren't allowed. We're not going to burn any time of the year, which may just be a slippery slope argument. Go ahead.
So I would counterpoint that with the fact that, both the state and the borough have worked really hard to maintain stoves on the list, and also come up with ways to keep burning going. We realize that it's cultural here. I myself, as I said earlier, I was born and raised here. Every house I've lived in has had a wood stove in it.
Right.
So I'm with you. Wood heat is nice. It's dependable when the power goes out. It's nice to have that backup. But we also live in an area that's you got a sizable population. We're sharing the air shed. Some considerations have to be made there.
So yeah, with you on that. And again, those are maybe fears that are coming down the way, but let's talk about what's actually happening now. So we talked about the limitations on wood stoves that can be installed new. And generally this comes up, I would say for the most part, because people aren't going into, you aren't going into people's houses and checking what their wood stoves look like. So this is generally coming up when you buy and sell real estate, when it's switching hands, which is why I obviously wanted you on, why I see a lot of it. So this is when these things are being upgraded, people having to pull wood stoves out, do the swap outs, which we'll get to as well. So we talked about that, but in the other item I want to talk about was the bans, or maybe ban's a harsh word, but the days that you can't burn throughout the year when that PM 2.5 is too high, I'm assuming, is when that's coming on. I remember the first year I moved back here, which was 21, I want to say. I don't know who I talked to, but they were saying, hey, the average is like 90 days of the winter they have this ban on, which seemed, I was like, that's unbelievable. That's a lot of days. And then I was kind of noticing this last year, and we've had a milder winter, and I was like, that couldn't have been 90 days. I don't know if you have that number off the top of your head.
I do not have the number off the top of my head. And as I said, the state handles all that.
Okay.
With the borough, like my purview is mostly just the change out program and our community monitoring program.
Okay.
I do interact with the state a lot, so I do have some of this information that I can share. But in general, there are twice as many curtailment days. We don't call them bans, curtailment days.
Yeah, I knew that was a harsh word. So.
No, I mean it's fair though. I mean it's days where the state's saying, hey, you can't burn. Right. But the curtailment days, there's about twice as many in North Pole than there is in Fairbanks, and then the kind of the Gold Stream area up there, never sees one at all, because they're up in the hills. They don't get the same issues that we have down here in the flats. But and like I said earlier, those are protected by the meteorologist, just trying to determine when we're going to have a bad inversion, when those PM 2.5 numbers are going to come up. So
how can someone keep up with, like, where would you say to go to be, like, if you're burning, you want to...
I would sign up on the state's website to get the text alerts, email alerts. So that's probably the best way to do it, because then they'll give them to you, like, 12 hours ahead of time or the day before. There's some schedule they're on where they pop up and they give you time to burn down if you're already burning.
Yeah, gotcha. So I think we've covered it pretty good. So you have the non-attainment zone, which is the limits of what this is. I hate to say the word regulating, but maybe that's a word, where we're regulating this PM 2.5, or we're overseeing it much closer, we'll say, as it compared to the rest of the borough. You then have specific days where, hey, we're not burning at all because the air quality is so poor and that PM 2.5 is too high. Is it basically what it seems to me, and maybe I'm wrong on this, is there any programs? We'll talk about the swap out program, I guess. So let's start with that. So what is the swap out program? This is also a thing I've heard a lot of misconceptions about as well. And maybe it has a more specific name, but you know what I'm talking about. Yeah.
The Fairbanks North Star Borough Wood Stove Change Out Program. It's actually a conglomeration of programs based off of I think we're at 5 different grants at the moment. And every grant has a different applicability. We've had local money, state money, federal money coming through. And this started back in 2010 with local dollars. And it started out as a program to switch out older, less clean burning devices for newer, supposedly cleaner devices. And then it's kind of morphed over time. So it's, like I said, started 2010, kind of peaked in 2014. After that, the switch of older devices to newer devices kind of slowed down a little bit, and we got away from going wood to wood. It's still possible. If you have an old barrel stove that, has been in your house for 30 years, you can still get a wood stove put in there as long as it meets the state's regulations, and we can do that. The incentives have changed over the years. I think it was like $2,000 back when I went through it back in 2011. Now we're up to, you can get, if you want to just straight remove your device, and then it's $10,000 for a wood stove. If you have a outdoor hydronic heater, you're looking at $14,000. And if you have a wood stove and a hydronic heater, easy math, $24,000 you can get. Wow. It does come with some downsides. So everything in our program, you go through our program, no matter what facet you take, aside from the bounty program, which I'll touch on in a second, you have to have a deed restriction, which limits the ability to install future wood stoves or wood heating devices, solid fuel burning devices.
Yeah, we didn't talk about pellet stoves. So pellet stoves are in the same boat for the most part. I mean, they're pretty clean as far as I can tell, but they're still
an approved list. You still have to meet the state's regulations for that. No burning means no burning of any solid fuel burning device, which includes pellet stoves.
Yeah. That's one I've heard a lot of people like, no, my pellet stove's fine. It's like, I don't think that.
Yeah.
Is
Well,
the case.
it's an interesting point. I mean, like a lot of people forget about pellet stoves. I mean, they most of them are direct vent. They vent. They have different exhaust. They're consistent fuel, and it's certified fuel. Dry, the timing of the loads, and the air controls all automatic. I mean, as long as you're not messing with things in there, I mean, they're generally pretty clean when compared against a wood stove.
Yeah.
It's funny though, because we talked about the EPA and the state and the borough wanting to maintain wood burning. The EPA would like us to go to a pellet only program like Missoula, Montana, and they've been pushing that for years. And the state and the borough have pushed back against that and said, well, what if we do this? Is this equivalent to a pellet only program? And so that's been kind of the give and take, trying to avoid where we are now, which is, we've entered a point where our last serious implementation plan, so that's the plan the state has to submit saying, hey, this is how we're going to fix the problem, got just disapproved by the EPA because it didn't meet certain specs. We didn't do this right. This has to be done. You're not going to do this. So the state is working right now to make the corrections, to try to make an approvable SIP. And one of the suggestions that was made by the EPA was a pellet-only program. If you removed wood stoves completely from installation in the non-attainment area. And the state said no. And the borough's like, no. Yeah, it's not going to work for us.
I appreciate that.
And so it's just what ends up happening. And like right now, we have this sanction clock running. So we have these sanctions where basically the feds say, if you don't meet this timeline, we're going to start imposing our own rules, and we're going to do what they call a FIP. So you have the SIP, which is the state implementation plan, and then you have a FIP, which is a federal implementation plan. And so when the feds come in, they just do whatever they want, right? No holds barred. They'll just say, no wood stoves.
Yeah.
Done. Guess what? You're going to have to use ultra low sulfur diesel as heating fuel. Yeah. And so this whole time, and a lot of people don't see this because this is all behind the scenes where the borough and the state are working with the feds saying, no, this is not feasible. This is not something we can do. And that's something the state had worked very hard on in their last submission, was proving that ultra low sulfur diesel was not viable as heating fuel due to the cost increase and the very small reductions from the SO2.
Yeah.
But they did, a couple years, a year and a half, 2 years ago now, they went from number 2 to number 1.
Yeah.
And that is a change that was made and was found to be economically and overall feasible.
So something we are hinting at, I guess you could say, but we've not directly said, is the reason this is so contentious is because it gets so freaking cold here. And so heating your house is a huge expense. Energy in general, which does relate back to that, is just expensive here. And so you've got this thing that is, again, as a very pro-wood guy, and so I'm really happy. I've never heard anyone tell me that, at least. Hey, they're fighting to actively try and keep wood-burning appliances in the borough. It's got to be frustrating. But anyways, it gets cold. Wood is this thing that's been done forever, burning wood, since, we knew how to make a fire. And doing that, it's something that you can do yourself. I'm not going to say it's cheap or easy because it does take equipment and things, but it's independent of the grid, as some would say. So it's got all these benefits to it, and then again, it's got this huge negative based wholly or maybe completely on just the fact of where we live, that that it's such a negative on air quality, and this smoke is not able to get away from our bowl basically, and to alleviate. So I think that's where a lot of that contention comes from. But I'm glad you brought it up, because this is a federal down item that as best I've heard, and I know you understand more, but my understanding is, hey, what you're saying is we got to hit these things, or they're just progressively going to take more and more control. And then I hate that idea. I hate that idea of the feds coming in, and I'm sure you're in the same boat, saying no wood stoves. Like, that's crazy. That's really crazy to hear. But yeah, so that gives me definitely something to chew on, because I don't know. Anyways, it's a tender spot in my heart for wood stoves, which it is for a lot of people. I'm not the only one, of course.
I mean, personally pro wood stove. I'm also pro human health, and I think that really the onus here is on the EPA to improve their testing and their methods, and then on manufacturers to come up with devices that can withstand and that are robust enough to. I mean, they make incinerators that put out less. I mean, that's something to think about, right? Like how is it that, these other regulated entities are emitting less than a wood stove?
Yeah. Well, let's pause on that. So the variations of how things are being burnt. So we haven't talked about that. So like you're saying, and you spoke about it with the pellet stoves, there's so much control happening. The fuel source is controlled. How it's being fed in is controlled. Like, all of it's very, very controlled. And again, there's some negatives of that. You've got to buy the fuel source. You can't cut pellets. It's, I imagine, pretty expensive to press sawdust together. But
they actually make adapters for tractors.
Really?
You can make like pellet foods for animals, and it also works for making pellets. I'm not by any means encouraging anybody to go out and make their own pellets, but they're actually adapters for tractors.
That's cool. Yeah. Maybe it's not so bad. I've never looked into it.
Yeah, if you live anywhere outside the Nonattainment area, feel free to give it a try.
Give it a shot. So wood stoves, however, there's a ton of variation. How you start your fire. Well, let's back up. When you cut the wood down, how much moisture is in that wood? How long it takes to dry? How you store it is probably the biggest thing, and how long you've stored it and letting the thing dry out. Of course, the whole concept is, if you're burning wet wood, it does not burn efficiently, and it's putting more particulates into the air. Burning dry wood, of course, gets you more heat. It's easier. It's all the wonderful things, but there's a lot of people. Like, for sure, my first winter here, I ran out of wood. I ordered some, and like nobody had any wood. I find some guy on Facebook or something, and he comes out, and it's like the worst, most green, and he's like, yeah, it's dry. So a lot of that crap happening, and I'm not for any of that. So like anybody who's like serious about wood burning or anything is not burning green wood. So if you're one of those people listening, do better. But there is a lot of that happening. The lack of control, of course. Even if you do have you have the best stove on the market, and you're not using it correctly, it's still it can perform really bad. So, anyways,
I jump in there and say that even between devices, there's degrees of difference. If you have a hybrid stove that has both the recirculating tubes and the catalyst, your device is going to perform better than just a device with a catalyst. A device with a catalyst is going to perform better than an uncontrolled stove. And so there are things that manufacturers have done to try to limit the amount of particulate emissions in general. But you're right. I mean, you get one guy who's burning 10 cords of beautifully moist aspen.
Blowtorching it because it won't start
through the season, and it can really. I mean, like you get that in an inversion time. I mean, that can settle and that can smoke out an entire neighborhood easily. One person can smoke out an entire neighborhood. Something
I've thought about. Well, let's back up. Let's talk about exceptions, because there are some exceptions to the burn curtailment. I remembered. My understanding is, if you have no other source of heat, you are
no other adequate source of heat.
Adequate source of heat. Okay. So you're able to keep burning through those.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah,
I don't know if there was any other exceptions.
So just the no ash waiver, the state's no other adequate source of heat waiver. And so basically you just go to the state's website, there's an application there, there's a bunch of hoops to jump through, you jump through the hoops and you get it.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah. You don't, just because you don't have that, you can't just keep burning. You need to have the actual waiver.
Right. And then once you get that waiver, the state will try to work to help you. Because I mean, the idea is not to let people freeze to death. And I mean, there's that realization, and I think a lot of people forget about it in this conversation. And it kind of gets me sometimes too when I'm sitting down with the EPA and talking with them, these East Coast guys, and you're like, well, Alaska's cold, and I don't think you realize the type of cold we deal with. Like, I saw 60 below again this year. This is the first time I've seen 60 below in a long time.
Yeah.
It's been at least 10 years, maybe more. 7, 10. I know I saw it in 2011.
Okay.
I don't remember if it was after that. Anyway, but I mean, like when you're talking to somebody, they don't know. They don't get it. And so, I'm like, hey, if it's 60 below and my furnace isn't working, or I have, you're going to do what you have to do to keep warm. And I think that's a realization, you get mad at these people for, so we moved into my new house in 2015 and there was a wood stove. We went out back at that summer after buying, we bought it in the fall and then went out in the summer and we were cleaning up the old wood shed. And I found pieces of furniture, particle board, covered furniture, broken up in the woodshed. And the first thing I thought was, man, they went straight up USSR in this place. Like,
things are getting rough.
But right? But at the same time, it's like, well, it was cold, right? Like, what are you going to do? What are you going to do to keep your family warm? What do you have this onus, and not only to keep yourself warm, to keep your family warm. And so, it's easy to blame somebody for burning wet wood or something like this. But at the same time, you're going to do what you got to do.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And I think the important thing for them folks to know is that there's resources out there to help you, whether it be, I know the state of Alaska has a heating assistance program. In the very distant past, I used it. It was great. They'll pay for wood. They'll pay for oil, propane, if you got one of those silly propane heaters that I do not recommend. But yeah,
is that for air quality reasons or expense reasons?
Expense reasons. Well, we had a propane heater in my first house up here, and we were down off of spacing it, PD Road, and it got cold. I mean, if it was 50 below everywhere else, it was 65.
That was our first house.
So cold.
It's like a bowl in the bowl.
It was horrible.
You go to North Pole's like city area, and you're like, it's warmer here, and everyone knows North Pole's colder than anywhere.
It had a propane heater, propane forced air. First off, the propane stopped working because it stops off gassing at a certain temperature. So like it hit like 25, 30 below, and all of a sudden I had to walk out there with a sleeping bag and a battery blanket and plug it in to keep the thing going. And then the heat was like somewhat moist. It felt like, I don't know. It just it is cool. I can't really explain it other than I was unimpressed and it cost me a lot of money.
Well, my buddy who has a very nice house, they built it with the hopes that at some point they're going to have natural gas run down that road, which it's not come yet. So he's lived there quite a few years. Also very upset at how much he has to pay for his is underground. I haven't heard him talk about the it getting too cold and causing him issues.
The insulation of the ground should keep it. Mine was above ground, what they call a pickle barrel, and it was just this big thing, and it was I don't recommend it.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that. So we talked about the solid, everything we've said. The wood stoves is probably the number one issue. Okay, well, let me pause. And then we'll really let this one die. If we do everything that is planned, will it actually fix the problem?
It could.
Okay.
It could. There's a lot of factors. One of the things that we've seen is since 2010, when we did our initial nonattainment study, we've reduced the emissions in North Pole by more than half. I mean, we were up like 165 micrograms per cubic meter, and now we're down to like 65. I mean, I say we assume it's things that we have done, but we've also had warmer winters. We've also had, different weather. We've been getting rain in January. I mean, there's all these different factors that are taken into account. However, the current modeling that the state has done shows that it should work. It's looking promising. Most of the emissions reductions that they're counting on come from the borough's change-out program and getting those older, dirtier devices out, replacing them with oil, gas, emergency power backup, I mean, we have lots of options down at the Borough.
Yeah. And that's some of the ones I wanted to talk about. So you can swap out your wood stove for wood. It sounds like in specific cases, far less common. And you can swap out where you just take your wood stove out. You talked about the hydronics boiler. Is that how we say that?
Yep.
Wood stove boiler, basically, or wood boiler.
Or coal.
Or coal.
Or pellet.
Yeah. Or what?
Pellet.
Oh, pellet. Yes. Yep. I was in one house that had a pellet stove. Oh, I did want to say, when you're talking about people trying to survive, when I first moved back, started selling real estate, I lived here as a kid. I consider this my hometown, but you're just not like in a lot of people's houses until you're a real estate agent. You're talking about people burning crazy stuff or whatever. A lot of the houses you go to here, it has that same feeling of like, hey, this is a harsh climate. This is a hard place to live. And they're just doing the best they can, man. Because I was so frustrated by like, why don't people build these things, especially like little dry cabins and stuff? And there are people that do it right, but there's so many that don't. And you're like, why don't they just do this right the first time? It's like, listen, they're doing what they could. They needed somewhere, with a roof overhead that they could heat in any way they could, with particle board furniture. So it is kind of a very specific thing to Alaska compared to the lower 48, where, especially like we'll bring up Hawaii at the very other end of the spectrum. It's like, man, you don't even need a roof over your head. You're good. Stay out of the storms, I guess. You're probably okay. But anyways, so you can swap out the wood stove there. You can also swap out from a oil to natural gas. There's a program for that as well, right?
Correct. We offer a $7,500 full boiler conversion or change out to natural gas.
Something I want to clarify. So if you're pulling out wood stoves, you can just get cash back, correct? If you're just like pulling it out.
Yeah.
Okay. And then these other ones are like, hey, we're paying to have the work done through a qualified.
Right. We have a list of qualified vendors or installers that you choose from. There's a whole process involved.
Yeah.
You fill out your application, then we'll send you an email, say, hey, do this, this, and this, and then you provide that, and then you decide whether or not you want to do self reimbursement, where you pay the vendor. They still have to be from the approved list, or you can just do the removal only. Get the $10,000 and go that way. With the oil to gas program, it's you have to use one of our vendors. There's no removal only feature. It's just you have to go through that process.
Absolutely. So, and we won't talk too much about natural gas unless you've got a good insight. There is a previous podcast, if you guys want to, that we interviewed the big gas guys.
IGU.
Thank you. So that was really good, really insightful. They spoke a lot about costs, transportation at the time, and this is still an ongoing thing, the supply of natural gas and what their plan is for that. So if you guys want more of that, also you can go to their site, and they have a pretty well updated, according to them, that it's accurate of where that gas line is. So if you're interested in that, you can put in your address there as well and see if you are close. They subsidize quite a bit of hookup costs for you there as well. Something I kind of just want to bring up, I know you may not have like a lot into this, is solar. Are you guys doing anything pushing towards solar as far as any programs on that side?
If somebody wanted to go to solar, that's something they could do.
Okay.
And there's less options, I guess, for installers in that realm. But if somebody want to look at it, just like heat pumps, we consider that electrical. So if somebody was interested in a heat pump, I wouldn't advise it for anybody in the lower areas. The heat transfer rate is just not enough to keep up with the cold temperatures. But, we've had some folks go through it. They're up in the hills that have been able to do something. But it usually gets cost prohibitive because you're using electric, again, to power that thing. And it takes a lot of...
Right, for the heat, I guess, in particular. Yeah, I guess is a little bit separate from the air quality talk there. But, I've been hearing, just on a side note, I was just talking to my neighbor about it, in fact, too. But it seems like everybody who gets solar panels for the energy side, we'll keep it away from the heating, if they're heating their house with electric or not, who knows, has been pretty happy, which I'm kind of surprised. I don't know. I would think solar here would just be a terrible idea, like just not knowing anything about it. I get that we have a lot of sun.
It depends on your expectations.
Right. Well, what they're talking about is an average of like 6-7 years to pay the things off. And I'm like, that doesn't sound bad. Well, if you don't have a battery system, the batteries are really expensive. And so I've not run the numbers. So this is not me for sure saying this is the case. But let's say that's true. Let's say you just get panels, you're feeding back into the grid. Because my neighbor who was talking to me was like, hey, is this going to raise the value of my house? I was like, yeah, it does. Maybe not as much as the panels cost or whatever. And then we're talking like, how long are you going to live here? He's like, hey, I expect it to pay itself off, based on what we looked at, 6 to 7 years. They're going to be here longer than that. I was like, well, if that's the case, they're going to be free at that point anyways. Like, why are you worried about if it brings your value up? He's like, well, I want more money. I was like, yeah, I mean, that's true. So they will. So if anybody's asking, they do bring your value up depending on how much you spend. It's always a tough one when someone asks that. It's like, well, I have to know what the actual number would be. An estimate I heard, which may be good for just panels, not a battery system, was like maybe 75 cents on the dollar you'll get back in a home valuation. Again, that's maybe a good starting point. So be careful about that, people. But anyways, I think we've covered pretty well the issues, what you guys are doing as far as a swap out program. Is there any other programs or things that we should know about that the public needs to know about, I guess, as far as improving air quality?
I don't know. We covered the majority of the change out. Like I said, it's important to know that if you got more than one wood stove, more than one fireplace, look into the program. I mean, you can stack 10,000 adds up pretty quick when there's no limit.
Yeah, this is interesting. This is interesting to bring up. That is a huge. That is something to think about. I'm just thinking on the home sales side. If we go, because you go to a lot of houses, and this does not. Let's back up. I keep doing that. Wood fireplaces. Yep. Is this what's going on with those? Because those are usually built right into the house. Yep. Are you getting 10,000 to pull a wood fireplace out as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or you can convert it to gas.
Right.
But if you pull it out, cap it off, wall it up, whatever it takes to get it sealed up so it can never be used again, then you can get 10,000 for that. And I mean, we've had a lot of apartment condo complexes.
Yes.
I mean, those built-in fire. I mean, you ever seen that rock front fireplace? My house had one when I moved in. It was built in the 70s. And it's 10,000.
Wow, So back to my point is, if you're buying a house, man, be looking for those wood stoves, even if you don't want a wood stove or a wood fireplace, even more importantly, because most people are not burning in a wood fireplace these days. They're talking about inefficient. Heat. Holy moly.
Not for heat.
Yeah, they're just sucking the air right out of there. So if you're serious about heating your house, you're not using just an open fireplace generally. You can get stove inserts for those. But yeah, that is something to consider if you're someone who doesn't care about the wood burning aspect, and you're saying you can stack that up. So what if you had, we're getting the nitty gritty here, but if you had a 2-story house, wood fireplace on each floor there, is that considered 2 separate?
Yeah.
So $20,000. That is really something to think about, people. I'm talking to you out there now because we were just buying a house there, and if you knew you could come back, and again, it does have to be approved, I guess we should say.
Yeah,
you go through.
You still
an
have to go through the
application
process, and there's a process for checking to make sure that you didn't just throw one in to try to get some money. And it's pretty.
And not to gloss over the deed restriction. Deed restrictions go with the property, and they are possible to remove, but they are really hard to remove. My understanding of how a deed restriction would be removed is if the original intent no longer applies. So I don't know I don't know a situation where that would come about. Maybe we figure out a whole different way to deal with our air quality, in the near or distant future. And then we look back at these things and say, hey, wood stoves no longer put out PM 2.5. I don't know. We figured out a filtration method. So there could be an argument at that time. But just know that, hey, if you do this, it does not just affect you. It affects everybody who owns that property. We'll just say from now into eternity, or until the USA is crumbled into a heap. No. Hopefully a long time from now. So, okay. And we talked a little bit about the future already. Of what's going on. So right now it sounds like we're in the stage of revamping what's an acceptable plan for the feds. Is that where we're at?
Yeah, that is correct. And the state's waiting on getting that in. I think they're planning on getting it in around June. Mm-hmm. And so, they'll have that in, and then the feds will have it in their hands again. What we're trying to avoid is further sanctions, like I mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. There's 2 types of sanctions. There's the 2-to-1 offset sanction. When that hits, basically that means that any industry coming into town that brings, say, 1 ton of pollutant would have to offset by 2 tons. So pretty much halts all industry coming in. And then also the other sanction would be looking at federal highway dollars, which we're kind of already dealing with now. So they start restricting those federal funds. They still come to the state, they just can't come to our area. So we end up in this kind of weird predicament where all of a sudden, road construction is going to start seeing a halt and, fixes. So
yeah, it's got wide implications. It's, again, just being frank with you, it's one that I'm so torn about, because I'm not someone who's like, screw everybody else. I want to do what I want to do. Like, I've never been that kind of person, but it's also, again, where it feels like, hey, we have this historical cultural thing that we do. And then that is being really threatened pretty heavily. And like you said, you're pro wood stove, and it sounds like the borough and the state are as well, which is great to hear. But it is just a bummer to hear that the feds are, they don't seem that they are, that they would prefer it not to be that way. But in somewhere, and again, like I used to live in Arkansas, there's wood stoves down there. It's not a problem, but if it was a problem, it wouldn't really be that big of an argument because, you know, it gets 30 degrees once a year or something. So the unique area here and the fact that our energy is so expensive, all these things kind of culminate into a little bit of a boiling situation, you know, very contentious.
And those are the arguments that the borough and the state has posed to the EPA, and probably the only reason that we've been allowed this long with this much, this little, I guess, pressure from the feds. The Region 10 has worked with us pretty closely. They've been pretty accepting of our explanations and our feasibility recommendations. But I do want to jump to December.
Okay.
December 31st, 2024. This is an important date. The state has a reg on there that says that any device that's not EPA certified or any device that is greater than 2.0 grams per hour and over 25 years old has to be removed by that date. Now, this is important because if you let that date slide by and you haven't applied for the change-out program, you are not eligible for the change-out program. So I just want to put it out there. It's very important that you get your applications in before that date if you have one of these devices, because they may not catch up with you now. The state's not going to actively go and look for your stove. They're not knocking on doors or anything like that. But when they find it in a real estate transaction, or when your neighbor decides to complain about the smoke, or whatever happens, and the state finds out you have a device in there, they're going to ask you to remove it. And, you know, they'll ask nicely a few times, and then they'll get a little less nice. And you won't get in. There's be no avenue for reimbursement for you if it's past that date. So I highly recommend people get in if you got one of these devices. If you're wanting to get something for it, come into the borough, put in an application, and we'll get you processed.
I'm glad you said that. Yeah. Is there any kind of tangential to that? Is there any programs for having more efficient homes as far as something like that?
So one of the things the state is trying to get on the books is a requirement that would require a home energy audit at the time of home sale, and that they're trying to get training up and trying to get those auditors to a point where they can withstand that kind of volume.
We would need
yes. But as far as that's about it. Of course, there's what is it? Weatherization program.
Thank you. Yeah.
yes, the weatherization program, and they've been around forever. I imagine they have funding, but you'd have to call them and ask. But.
Yeah. You know, I've not seen stuff recently on it. You do go into houses that are very obviously you can tell have been done. They've been furred out or whatever the thing is. So that is a way to holistically is a weird word for this, but like look at, hey, how can I make things cheaper outside of burning wood? It's have a tighter house, where...
Absolutely.
Yeah, because you got that 60 below, which we don't have often.
Just remember, if you're going to have a tighter house, to have good ventilation.
Yes.
Very important. Otherwise,
you could also have a mildew.
Moisture buildup and mold is just as unhealthy, if not more so than...
Good point. We're going the wrong way. No, but yeah, there are obviously a lot of ways to deal with that as well now. So wonderful. Is there anything else we missed or something you'd like to add?
Not at all.
Cool.
I think we covered a bunch of stuff. I appreciate you having me here. And
yeah, I'm glad you came out. I know this is kind of a contentious conversation, so others may not want to talk about it, but yeah, it was good. It was good to go through the
everybody's, anybody listening or, yourself, you have any questions, any other realtors, feel free to reach out to our office. I don't work for the state anymore, so I can answer some of those questions, but I would refer you to them for your state regulation questions. But any questions on the change out program and what we can do to help you initiate your sale and get through that process, we have a process set up with the state. So if you have a device that needs to be removed and you want to set it up so the person so that the seller starts the process but the buyer gets to choose the option, that's the process that we have in place. So just reach out and we'll do what we can to help you.
Wonderful. All right. Hey, thanks, man.
Yep. Thank you.
Hey there. Thank you so much for listening. If you want more content from AK Blake, you can find me on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, all under the handles AK Blake. Or if you want to listen to more podcasts, anywhere you get your podcasts, it's there, Fairbanks year-round. You may or may not know, I am a local real estate agent here in Fairbanks with the Summit Realty Group. So if you like what I'm doing and you want to move to the area, you already live in the area, or you're looking to invest further into real estate in the area, you can reach me. Probably the best will be either my website, akblake.com, my email, blake@akblake.com, or my phone number is probably the fastest, 907-651-8356. You can call or text. Thank you so much, and I'll see you on the next one.